hope you all are doing well and enjoying our journey together on qualitative research. As you know, we are in the process of covering data analysis in qualitative research. And today I'm going to talk about a very important concept that all qualitative researchers are engaged in. So I'm going to talk about field notes and memo, which are used in qualitative researches for different purposes. Oftentimes, I get a sense, sometimes, not oftentimes, is students get confused between these two concepts and they use field notes and memos interchangeably. So the purpose of today's video is to help you understand how these two tools which are used in qualitative analysis as well as data collection, how they are similar or different. They are different actually, not similar. So we will understand how they are different in terms of what is the purpose, how it is being done, implemented. So we will learn all those things in detail. So let's start. I'm going to put here like two columns so that we could just compare and see how it looks like in practice. So let me start with here, memos, and I'll put this information here in blue color. And for field note, I'll use a different color here so that it makes more easy to see that. And let me start with first thing, which is the purpose. So what is the purpose of a field note? Why it is used for? The purpose of a field note is to document observations, interactions, and events. So as a researcher, when I start collecting data, I'm doing participant observation, let's say, maybe I'm doing interviews. So field notes, what I do in field note is I record my thoughts, observations, interaction, my observations related to what I see in the field. So for instance, let's say if I'm doing focus group interviews, so just before the focus group interviews, I can write notes in my field note about what do I observe there in terms of the setting there. I can write my observation regarding just after the interview. When I have a fresh memory, I can talk about how the interview went and some of other observations that I had. And let's say if I'm doing participant observation, so after my session of observation is done, then I write my observation about the session, observation session. So basically, the purpose of a field note is to document a researcher's observations, interactions, events happening in the setting, research setting, and record those thoughts on their field note. A memo is a reflective, an analytical tool which is used to record thoughts, theoretical insights, conceptual insights or theoretical insights, uh, interpretation of the data, maybe researchers' hunches, or researchers' insights on data, not data, but emerging theories. So it's a reflective tool. Unlike here, you see it's a document to record researcher observations regarding the interactions happening in the field, about the process of data collection and all that. It's memos are reflective and analytical tool, and we call them reflective analytical tool because in memos you write your thoughts related to theoretical insights. So for instance, when I'm doing my initial coding, during those coding process, I may have an insight about a code, a theme, or maybe a theoretical understanding. So I will write those understandings in my memos. If I'm doing, let's say, data analysis and I have a hunch about something, some analytic perspective that I developed while listening to an interview or while doing the coding, those hunches, those insights related to the data, that will go in my memos. So that's the two separate purpose of uh, field notes and memos. In terms of content, sorry, should use the other one. In a field note, you talk about, you describe actually environment, I mean research environment here. As I said previously, if let's say a participant has invited me for an interview and I reached there 10 minutes ago, I'm sitting in that environment and I have some thoughts, some observations related to that environment, that setting, and I can record that. Uh, once I was doing an interview with a mental health counselor, and she invited me to her office. In her office, there was this a big quotation of a Rumi, and I noticed it and I wrote in my field note about this quotation on the wall of her office, which talks about basically something related to what is mental health is. And Rumi has some really insightful ideas, observations in his poetry that mental health counselors often use. And I saw one of those quotations there. So that went into my field note. So we, in terms of content in our field note, we talk about environment, we describe environment. We also talk about our interactions. So let's say if I'm doing interviews or a focus group or individual, then just after the interview, I can write my reflections about how this interview went. How do I personally feel about my interaction with this participant or this group? If I'm doing, let's say, a participant observation in the natural setting of the people, if I'm doing an ethnography, in that case, just after doing my observation, I will write my field note and I'll talk about my interactions with the people or my observation, what I have been doing. You also talk about nonverbals. This is also important. So again, take the same example. If I'm doing an interview, and as part of my interview, I'm recording it, everything. But you remember, we also, as a researcher, we notice body language or nonverbal cues that we get from our participants. So those nonverbal that we notice, that also goes to our field notes. Our initial thoughts and reactions. Initial thoughts and reaction in the sense like, if I'm in a setting doing some observation, what are my initial reactions? What are my initial thoughts when I reach there? Or so those kind of things also goes to your field note data. So that's what in summary we write in our field note. In terms of our memos, we write our reflections on the data. So again, same example that I gave previously. If I'm coding a transcript, once I'm done the coding, and then I can write some reflections about how was that experience, what was something that caught my eyes. So we write our reflections on the data. We also write our connections with a theoretical framework or let's say conceptual framework. So if I'm using a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework in my study, so when I'm, let's say, doing the data analysis, beginning coding, or maybe even later codings, I can reflect on how what is emerging from the data is connected with the theoretical framework or conceptual framework that I have been using. You also write some questions, wonderings raised by data. So when we start our data analysis or collecting the data, so if sometimes we wonder about something, sometimes we might have some questions about the data or about what is emerging, some codes or some themes. All those questions and wonderings are recorded in our memos. We also write our methodological considerations. In our memos. So methodological considerations such as, for example, let's say if I'm doing a grounded theory, I'm collecting the data, and then I'm asking myself, have I reached a stage of theoretical saturation, or do I further need to keep collecting data until I reach a theoretical saturations? So such methodological considerations also are part of our memos writing. So we reflect on these pieces in our memos. Further, thoughts on emerging analysis. So when we start our data collection, data analysis, beginning analysis, and around the whole process of data analysis, we record our thoughts about what is emerging from the data. So in summary, in memos, we record our reflections, our wonderings, our questions, focused on the data. So coding, themes, categories, theories, all these reflections goes into your memos. And in field notes, basically, it's a description of your environment, research environment, your interaction with your research participant. You are noticing some nonverbals and initial thoughts and reactions related to all these pieces here. So that's how they are different in terms of what is being recorded in field notes and memos. Now let's talk about another important thing, which is timing. So when do you write your field note versus when do you write your memos? So in terms of timing, field notes are written when you start collecting the data. So when you are going in the field, when you are doing your interviews, when you are having your focus group interviews, when you are doing your observations, participant observation or indirect observation, direct observations. So in this whole process of data collection, when you are in the field, out in the field, so those are the timings when you write your field notes. For memos, the timing, in terms of timing, we write our memos when we are at our home, in our office, and the data is collected. Now I'm transcribing the data and I might have a hunch about the data. When I'm doing coding, and I might have some thoughts, reflections related to what is emerging from the data in terms of codes, in terms of themes, in terms of categories, in terms of theoretical categories which is emerging from the data. So those are the timings when we use our memos. In terms of data, another thing to keep in mind is field notes are basically data source. So when you are in the field, when you are writing your field notes, these are data actually. So along with using your interview data, interview transcript or focus group transcript or your observation transcript, when you write your field notes, which is like focused on describing research environment, your interactions, nonverbals, or those initial thoughts and reactions in the field, so those are also data. So your field note is considered as data, and you also code your field notes so that you can use the information, maybe some codes emerging from there, which you include in your data analysis. So basically your field notes are data source. However, with memos are not source of data, but it's basically a template, a place where you are actually involved in conversation with yourself as a researcher and try to ruminate, try to reflect on what is happening here. So it's sort of a data analysis tool, where as field notes are basically you are generating data, so which you later use it for analysis, while memos are template. Memos are a place of reflections, a place for reflecting on what is emerging from the data, a place for reflecting on why the decisions you are making in terms of selection of a code, in terms of what categories you should select for further analysis, what theoretical how theoretical framework can be integrated in what is emerging from the data, how conceptual framework is related here or can be integrated here in the data. So all those reflections are happening in your memos. So that's briefly about how field notes and memos are different. In summary, I would say that field note is something that you record your thoughts, your observation, you describe it, and then when you are out in the field, so when you are in the process of collecting data, and it's a data source. So you are, along with generating the data, which is your interview data, focus group data, or observation data, you are also creating another data source, which is your field note, which describe maybe your hunches, which describes what you are noticing when you are doing observation or when you are interviewing. So this is basically a data source that you later use in your data analysis process. And memos are basically, it gives you a field where you are constantly reflecting, thinking, and wrestling with to come up with better explanation, to make sense of the emerging codes. And it helps you in the process of later stage of data interpretation. So when you write your codes, in the next phase, what you do, you look at the codes and maybe merge those codes and come up with maybe some broader codes, and later those broader codes turns into categories, which later turns into themes, and later they turn into a theory. So in all this process of data analysis, memos are a template, a place where a researcher is constantly reflecting during this process. So I hope this explanation has helped you to understand what is the purpose of a field note and what is the purpose of a memo writing in qualitative research. I'll see you again in another video on data analysis and qualitative research. Till then, have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you soon.